Welcome. I'm Felicity Ezewuike. The struggle over presidential term limits and constitutional power in Africa is an inexhaustible subject matter with multiple layers. Today, we continue that discourse from the prism of what's playing out in Somalia. The parliament there has approved constitutional changes that could extend the term of the president and lawmakers while delaying elections originally expected in May this year. The amendment extends the tenure of both the president and parliament from 4 to 5 years. Supporters say the changes will help stabilize governance and clarify Somalia's federal political system. On the other hand, critics argue it risks concentrating power and undermining democratic accountability, especially in a country still grappling with insurgency from al-Shabaab and fragile state institutions. Well, the most important part here is Somalia is far from alone in this. Across Africa, constitutional changes to extend presidential rule have sparked intense political debate from Uganda to Rwanda, Chad, Guinea, and beyond. We just heard in Guinea that 40 political parties, including strong opposition, has been banned. Well, let's get some perspective on this. We're joined by Levi Mbosho, Global Affairs Analyst. He joins from Kinshasa. Abdirahman Yussuf is a journalist from Mogadishu, Somalia. Adikha Mungu Daniel is a lawyer and political analyst. He joins from Kakamega town in Kenya. Gentlemen, thank you very much for obliging us now on one slot. I will start with you, Abdirahman, just to get some basis for our conversation today. Is there any historical or political background that helps justify Somalia's parliament approving this constitutional amendment at this time?
Thank you. Thank you once again for inviting me. Just to commence with, yes, remember Somalia has been operating with a provisional constitution for 13 years. The constitution mainly has been a system, a clan-based when it comes to elections. It has mostly been a clan-based constitution where the four major clans usually get the bigger share of the cake, and it's called 4.5. Remember, Somalia is, has a very complex clan system, which has also brought about insecurity. Just to commence with, you see, from the cake sharing process, where leaders usually, the clans usually elect their leaders. Corner tribes, what many people usually refer to corner tribes, are the ones who usually felt left out. And if you just look at the compromisation of al-Shabaab, it usually mostly comprises of tribes which usually see themselves as they've been left out of the big cake sharing and process. So, and there are a lot of good things about this constitution, but what raises question is the timing. As you just explained in your earlier monologue.
All right. Let's bring in the lawyer now to give us the legal and political perspective on the same question. The historical and legal background that helps justify this parliament's decision to amend the constitution at this time. Please.
First, thank you for having me here.
Okay, go ahead. I thought your device was muted.
Thank you for having me. Straight into the discussion, I would say yes. There is a significant political and institutional background behind the amendment. And first, I would say this because, Somalia has operated under a provisional constitutional adopted in 2012, which was meant to be temporal, while the country built institutions and after decades of civil war, following the collapse of the regime of Mohamed Siad Barre in 1991. Many political actors, I've long argued that the constitution needed completion and clarification. And possibly that would be the reason why there has been sort of a debate and discussion around the amendment, that they can no longer go into an election without a complete constitution, you know. Buying too much time into an election without having a complete, a fully enacted or implemented constitution would still lead to so many other political effects that not anger well into the political landscape of Somalia. You know, secondly, again, you'd find that Somalia has been trying to transition from the clan-based in direct directions, you know, elections, where clans elect their MPs, then the MPs move ahead to elect the president. And this, in a way, has not had a good degree to the universal suffrage system, where citizens elect lawmakers directly. And this has actually led to sort of discomfort within Somalia as a country, whereby citizens do not have a free will to elect their own leaders. And these six only be changed with a constitution coming into place. Thus, the delay that the parliamentarians decided to do an amendment sort of that would allow the regime to operate for 1 year towards election, so that the election can actually be carried forward for 1 year, to give room for the completion and full enactment of the constitution of Somalia, to just breathe in fresh air into the political landscape of Somalia.
Yeah, fresh air. Do you agree with that, Abdirahman, with what we're seeing? Because the changes is set to extend the terms of the president and the lawmakers for 4 to 5 years, including, perhaps you can correct me on that, the incumbent. Why was this proposal introduced now, considering that elections were expected in May? And could you also confirm, perhaps, if that election has been totally removed?
Yes, the timing really raises questions as to why it's happening now. Remember, this is not the first time such kind of thing is happening in Somalia. And in 2021, we had where the former president, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, tried to extend his term. And we can all remember what happened, the Mogadishu mutiny, where we had a division, a fragmentation of the army and the security sector of the country. Mogadishu was in a mess, and it could have gone way bad were it not from the intervention from international partners and opposition. One of the main critiques of this constitution is opposition, and they have genuine and legitimate concerns, which is why is it happening now? Remember, you could be driving a good point, but in Somalia, without a good consensus, it may cracken the fissures which are already there in this country. Jubaland, which is a state in Somalia, and also Puntland are the two main states which have refused to work with the federal government. This started a long way ago from 2024, where the Somalia had the National Consensus Meeting, NCA. They failed to take part and are stating that, remember, Puntland was one of the first federal member states in Somalia, which was formed in 1998. So it said that these things cannot be happening from Mogadishu, and there should be consensus from all federal member states for these things to work.
Okay, talk to us about, because even now, I tried to see if I could confirm, is it still on the realm of speculation, or is the election that was expected in May now cancelled? You didn't respond to that part.
It's still in speculation. It hasn't been cancelled, but since of the already, it kind of means it's because since the constitution has already been passed, that definitely extends the limit from 4 years to 5 years.
Okay. Yeah. Let's come back to you, Adikha, and talk about what supporters are saying. They're arguing that the reform that is now being put in the Constitution clarifies governance structures and better aligns federal institution. What is your view on this? Is this a credible justification or just a batch of balderdash?
From my end, I think there is a political rationale whereby if you look at it closely, you'll find that the key opposition leaders within Somalia and some federal states claim the reform lacks consensus, which actually raises legitimate questions into the entire process, you know. And I want to agree with Abdirahman because, you know, the amendment comes in at a time when the country needs to go into an election. But here, we have to look at two things. One, do we strengthen the country through a constitutional means, or do we run into an election and then come back later and still go back into the roots of trying to reform the country constitutionally? Or do we face ourselves with the question of, let's take the country for 1 year, extend the regimes 1 year, and allow it fully, make sure that the country has the country enacts a constitution that would allow it to go into an election properly. You know, these two questions are really, to me, are rational and needs to be answered broadly with a lot of wisdom from both competing interests. You know, one, we agree there needs to be consensus and agreement in terms of what really needs to happen in Somalia in terms of whether do we need the amendment or not. And again, does the amendment really seek to satisfy the majority desires within Somalia or not? Because as we speak right now, Somalia as a country can no longer wait for a constitutional moment or an agenda again. So I would say that possibly the opposition and the federal state need to come close to government and sort of agree to finalize on matters having a constitution at hand. Thank you.
All right, Abdirahman, considering, I'm referencing your earlier comment, considering the state of affairs, is a consensus likely?
Not at all. Not at all. Remember, one of the things that the president is stating to these federal member states, for example, like Jubaland, is they've already had their elections. And I think they've had more than 3 or 4 meetings in the last few months, almost a year, where we've had external actors such as Kenya and Ethiopia trying to mediate. It hasn't been fruitful. And I think between the parties, between the federal government and these federal member states, one needs to compromise and none is willing to compromise. So I think things are a standstill.
Okay, I'm going to stay with you. So if the consensus is unlikely, where does that leave things? And what are the possible implications we're looking at here?
I mean, this is Somalia. Anything is possible. From experience, we've seen such kind of a scenario I just mentioned it in 2021, 2022. And wait, not from the external pressure from international partners, that is the AU and the European Union and the like. Somalia was teetering to the edge of what it was once known from back like 30 years ago in 1991, once the federal government collapsed. So I think what is going to happen is, and will elections happen? It seems unlikely. Elections happened for Mogadishu, Banadir in 2025, December. I was among the few journalists who were covering that election. But remember, it only happened in Mogadishu. Now, for a universal suffrage election to happen across the country, remember, Somalia is still controlled, large part of the swathes of land are still being controlled by al-Shabaab. Last year alone, we had, 2025, we had, I think, close to more than 2,300 attacks from al-Shabaab within the country. So, is it going to happen practically? I don't think so. If it's going to happen, will these states, are they willing to compromise? I don't think so. So what's on the card is, I think there's going to be a compromise. I don't know from which, whether it's going to be from the federal member states or the federal government. But what happens in Somalia is most of the time Somalis are not able to solve their problems and external actors have to come in place and in order to push them. Just like in the Farmajo government, international partners told him that things continue the way they are. They're going to pull out with the aid and everything, and that's why he had to compromise. So I think with mounting pressure from the opposition, and if things go the way they are, the country could be in turmoil. I think the president is going to consider and compromise his position.
To that, hopefully I don't forget. Adikha, Considering the ongoing security challenges, Abdirahman has mentioned some of them, especially with the presence of the al-Shabaab. Could the government legitimately argue that political continuity is necessary for stability?
Absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. It is, that in fact gives government more room to sort of like lie on itself on a question of political stability, because, now what it means is, as to what Abdirahman seeks to say, without the universal suffrage system, it means Somalia can no longer give the people power to elect a government of its own. But what it will seek to do much more is return back to its normal state of doing things as usual, which has, in one way or the other, contributed to the country to be where it is in its state, in its political state. And that clearly would mean government would defend its position. One, stating that, the government needs time to complete its constitution before implementing universal suffrage. And number two, it would say electoral reforms requires time for institutional and legal alignment. And that would give it time, so that it can be able to bring in the constitution. And if that fails, and the key opposition leaders together with the federal system state decide to go another route and say possibly we are not into it, then we are looking at a position whereby Somalia would once again be termed as a failed state, whereby it would be a state operating without a legitimate document to guide it. It would be a system operating without a legitimate government that clearly get its power or origins of its power from the people and those who majority support it. And that would really, really not be good for Somalia and also just for the region that surrounds Somalia as a whole.
Abdirahman, talk to us a bit more about these external actors and the role that they are playing in Somalia's democracy, governance, and well-being.
I think most of Somalia's service, be it from the military to basic services like the health ministry and the finance and what have you, is mostly financed by international actors. Somalia is I think it's a place where most of the NGOs and world organizations usually tender services to the public. So they really hold a major say when it comes to the politics in this country. We have geopolitically, we have Turkey, which has really invested in this country, be it the airport, be it the sea, where they're currently trying to drill oil from the sea in Somalia. So I don't think it's going to really let Somalia go back to where it came from. Still on the same issue, remember Jubaland and Puntland leaders, Ahmed Madobe and Denny, have enjoyed a cozy relationship with the UAE. Just a few weeks ago, UAE, its embassy and all its aid on anything that it was doing in Somalia was chased away by the country, stating that UAE was interfering with the sovereignty of Somalia. It's really complex. Many political commentators view it as UAE being one of the main causes of the federal government and federal states not uniting. We've had cases where Puntland state was accused of transporting military arms to the RSF in Juba. It's really problematic. But whether the external actors do have a say, yes, they do have a say. We saw it in 2022, where they forced the former president, the ninth president of Somalia, Abdullahi Farmajo, who wanted to extend his term for 2 years, to concede and hold elections that same year. So I think once again, the international community is really going to play a pivotal role in making sure there's consensus between the federal member states and the federal government.
You do have it right when you say it is indeed a complex situation. I made an attempt to try and understand the background. I just had to give up and come ask you experts your thoughts on it to help amplify what we know about what's going on there and possible solution. Adikha, how does Somalia's case compare with constitutional changes we've seen elsewhere in Africa? Say, like a place in Guinea, for instance. The latest news coming out of there is that authorities recently dissolved 40 political parties, including 3 largest opposition group. What parallels does this bring to mind?
I would say that across Africa, constitutional amendments usually fall into 3 categories. One would be issues around the term limit changes. Number 2 would be electoral system reforms, and then number 3 would be on crisis-driven extensions. And Somalia case combines all the 3. Because if you look at some of the African examples that are clearly about to deal with matters around the constitutional changes leading to elections, Rwanda would be a very good example. In 2015, the constitution was actually amended, allowing President Paul Kagame potentially to stay in power until possibly 2034. And if you again look at Uganda, Uganda offers a very complex example. The parliament removed the presidential terms limit in 2005. And then in 2017, it allowed the president by continually removing term limits for one to vie for presidency. If you look again, for example, in Togo, 2024, 2025, those are constitutional restructuring. The changes created a powerful prime ministerial role without term limits. These are some of the cases that have actually been at par in Africa. And in many African countries, you'd find that sort of the incumbent always run, when their term come to an end, they would always run into matters around constitutional change to possibly buy their time into power as they plan their way out on getting maybe friendly parties or friendly individuals to just be able to get into them. But for Somalia, it's a bit critical, because Somalia, we would want to term it as a fragile democracy. And when you are dealing with fragile democracy, anything, any spark, any concept of it or context of it being get wrong would lead the country into a wrong way. And as it stands, there are so many examples to borrow from Africa that didn't go well. And many a times, all these countries that have had constitutional change, you'd find that the political space, most of the opposition space within their own countries, are failed or completely are limited. This is not a good concept for each and every country in Africa to be able to borrow. Thank you. All
right, I'll come back to you, Adikha, but I want to take Abdirahman's thoughts on this particular question. I'm going to bring that same question to you. Electoral reforms, how should that be done in order for it to be acceptable? Because there are so many warring parties. What would be a consensus at this point? Because you said them coming together is not something you see happening. I mean, agreeing is not something you see happening anytime soon.
I may try to be optimistic, yes, but with the way things are, I don't see it happening. Remember, the electoral system of Somalia is, we've had member of where the clan elders usually choose the member of parliament. The member of parliament in a place called Afisioni, they end up choosing the president. How does this happen? I think, as I mentioned earlier, Somalia is a clan-based. Somalia has a clan-based system, and one of the main things that led to the fall of the government of the dictator Said Barre in 1991 is other main clans felt left out. So what they came up with is a system called 4.5. What's a 4.5? The 4.5 is a system where the 4 major clans get to have bigger chunks of the national cake. And there's a 0.5. 0.5 is where the minority clans usually have the other supportive positions. So it's been a constitution of where the minority have their say and the majority have their way. With this new constitution, it's really promising. It's going to change a lot of things, including how the elections do happen. It will be really great. I was really impressed was just small, but I was really impressed with covering the 2025 elections, the mayoral elections in Mogadishu in December 2025. So if the Somali republics are going to have the opportunity, citizens rather, are going to have the opportunity to elect their own leaders and hold universal suffrage elections, it's going to be great and amazing. But is it practical? No, because of the many things we've stated, be it security-wise, be it the lack of consensus between the federal government and the federal member states. So yeah. I think the issue is mainly going to be the timing. And although this has been one of the main manifestos of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud since he came to power in 2022, I wish the timing could be a little bit better. Okay. Where the constitution is being approved. So maybe, for example, let's say this could be happening in 2023 or 2024. It could have been a totally different conversation. But it happening few months to the date where the election is scheduled for is what raises questions and eyebrows.
Adikha, the same question.
I would largely say, Somalia's case is complex, and maybe my rallying call would just be that they would need much more support in terms of finding better ways to ensure that actually our constitution really comes into place. Somalia has taken a long journey towards constitutionalism. And I think it's a high point that as a country, both the key opposition leaders, the federal states, together with government, really need to sit down together and really think about the future of Somalia. And possibly, even if it means the extension of time, they need to build a consensus so that they can be able to move forward. Or else they will still remain stuck in a political quagmire that necessarily does not have an end, but much more of a time frame that doesn't end. All I would again maybe say is just that government needs to come up with a timeline, that would be able to work well with the federal, state, and the key opposition leaders to ensure that actually as we head forward, security necessarily does not come up as a major factor as much as it plays a central role into whether Somalia would really need a 1 more year extension before an election or not. But as we speak, maybe the African Union needs to come in place, the East African community needs to come in place and assist Somalia actually get over this matter.
All right. We'll need to take a break now. When we come back on the flip side of the conversation, we'll be looking at the broader picture here, the penchant of African leaders to amend the constitution to perpetuate themselves in power. Stay with us. I'm very glad you're still here with News Central and One Slot. The conversation continues. In the second half, we're going to expand it. We're talking about the struggle over presidential term limits and constitutional power in Africa through the prism of what is happening in Somalia, the current developments there. And we've looked at that extensively in the first half. This time, we want to see if we can expand it further. Now, we know that in many African countries, leaders have used constitutional amendments to extend their stay in power. Let's get a perspective from Adikha why this pattern appeared to be so persistent now across the continent. And perhaps if you could chip in what relevant regional bodies are doing.
Thank you very much. I would say that some of the reasons why you'd find that there is matters around constitutional amendments to extend power limits, majorly in Africa, would be subjected to one, a weak institutional systems, whereby you'd find that the courts and parliaments within certain African countries are not independent, and they rely on the powers and the whims of the executive. That is why it would be easy for them, for parliament to just easily pass an amendment or bring in a bill that seeks to amend the constitution to allow for term limit. And once the matter goes to court for an objection, you'll find that because the courts are not also operating independently, because they're being infiltrated by the executive, they would just rule in favor of the executive towards extension of the power limit. Number two would also be a point of dominant ruling parties in Africa. We've seen majorly again that Africa is still dominated majorly by major political parties. For example, if you go back to South Africa, you'd find the question of ANC. If you go back to a country like Zimbabwe, you'd still find matters around ZANU-PF. If you go back to a country like Uganda, you'd find a National Resistance Movement, that is NRM. If you go back to a country like Rwanda, you'd still find issues around their political party that since came into power, they've not had an opportunity to go out. And majorly what happens, again, you'd find that now these major political parties do play a bigger hand in terms of who comes next into power. And they would always find a loophole. Wherever they see that they are losing favor with the people or they're losing favor with the system, they would always run for the easy option, which is majorly extending power limits. Number two, again, you'd find it is a matter of personalization of power. The African heads of state who find that power is sort of like a birthright to them, and they necessarily do not want to come out of power. And a very good example, you'd find that, for example, in Uganda, the Ugandan president has closely now been in power for over 35 years, to an extent that his parliament passed an amendment to completely remove power limits, that he can stay in power as long as he wants. You see, that does not necessarily favor democracy in many of our African countries. And lastly, fear of post-power consequences. Having seen what has happened to major countries like in Chad, what has happened to major countries like in the Central African Republic, what has happened in Guinea, what has happened in Somalia, you'd find that this has contributed many a times to the people not being able to come out and express themselves well, or even oppose such a move when it comes to extension of power limits. And this has contributed to many countries in Africa failing when it comes to questions of democracy, when it comes to questions of people sticking legitimately into power.
Okay. Abdirahman, some governments, this particular question has come up in different forms, in different conversation on this platform. Some governments argue that Western models of term limits do not always fit African political realities. Is there any merit to that argument? And should we be considering that in our future amendment? And would one pattern fit everyone in Africa?
No, I don't think that narrative carries a day, because remember, in Africa, we have power in many states. It's highly centralized. We have the presidency who control the security forces, key appointments, the budget, the contracts, access to opportunities. So the president tends to have much leverage, which means losing power is losing protection. And honestly, it's not to take a dig at African leaders. Most leaders are, I think, but in Africa, we have quite a distinction where corruption is just on another level. So they usually worry once they go out of power, what could come behind. And trying to state the narrative that the presidential term limits is a thing for the Western world is, I don't think, something that works. I think power should be transferred to other people you need to serve. I think great African leaders like Nelson Mandela showed us what it means to be a leader.
Adikha, critics say constitutional changes often occur where institutions like the judiciary and electoral bodies are weak. How central is institutional independence in preventing the abuse of constitutional reforms?
They are very critical and very important towards advancing democracies in any country. Once you have a weak judiciary, it therefore goes without saying that that country would pass any law, no matter how it looks, whether it favors the people or not. Once you have a weak parliament, then it means more bills will come into the flow of the House that does not favor the wills, the wishes, and the aspiration of the people, but favors the political class. So Parliament, the judiciary, and even the civil society movement need to be independent and very strong for them to be able to just fight for the political space, fight for the democratic space, that it can actually be expanded and the people can easily be able to enjoy it. We've seen countries like Ghana, Botswana, Senegal doing fantastic well on the ideologies of democracy. And we've seen great transition in these three countries. I would not want to necessarily also miss the point that what is also currently happening in my country, Kenya, in itself, you'd find that having strong institutions led by the judiciary and parliament and even the civil society organization has led to radical changes that have enabled the country to take a direct and a good step towards democratization, and also just opening up the free space of expression and free space of people being able to actually allude to what they so wish and so desire. But lack of the three, being weak and having limited power to operate, would lead to a country not necessarily performing well in terms of democracy.
Abdirahman, your thoughts on what distinguishes countries that successfully defend constitutional term limits from those where such safeguards eventually collapse?
I think it's mainly has to deal with political culture and the liberation and the legitimacy. Some leaders usually drive authority from movements or historical struggles. Figures like we've seen Robert Mugabe, Yoweri Museveni, frame themselves as guardians of the national stability after liberation wars. But over time, stepping down, began to look like they are abandoning their mission. So another thing is also security. I mean, some governments have had problems where they usually state that extensions are necessary during security crises. So a country having a good security and stable political environment is also another issue. I mean, we've already stated out another problem could be the fear of prosecution after leaving office, which is another blunt reality. Once leaders step down, most of them usually face, corruption investigations, political retaliation, international cases, and the like.
Okay, I wish we had more time. This question would have gone to the both of you, but I'll just send it to Adikha for now. And that's, are there examples, perhaps, of countries in Africa where attempts to extend power were successfully resisted by institutions, perhaps the courts or civil society? If there are, what can we take from that experience?
Thank you. Definitely, there are strong cases where institutions or citizens defended democracy. And one example would, in the year 2014, Burkina Faso, there was mass protest that forced President Blaise Compaoré to abandon plans to extend his 27-year rule. If you look at Senegal in 2012, again, courts allowed Abdoulaye Wade to run again, but voters defeated him in election. If you look at Zambia in 2001, for example, again, civil society and parliament blocked President Frederick Chiluba from seeking a third term. And if you look again at Malawi in 2019 to 2020, you'd find that courts annulled their fraudulent election and ordered a new vote, demonstrating judicial independence. And lastly, if you look again in Kenya, what happened in 2017, the Supreme Court annulled a national election and called in for a new election. This clearly goes in to show that there are countries that have actually upheld the rule of law, have actually upheld the matters around constitutionalism, and they've been able to reap it in good and in beneficial way to its people, and just even to its own structure and institutions.
Abdirahman, what role should regional organizations like the African Union play when constitutional reforms appear designed to prolong incumbency rather than strengthen democracy?
I think the AU hasn't been quite effective. Just I'll set it into perspectives, mainly in ensuring that presidential election extensions don't happen. I mean, just looking at the number of times this has happened in Africa is quite astonishing. I mean, I was just looking at data where we've had, I think, close to 28 African states changing, having a 47 term limit changes from 2000 to 2018. For all those years, the AU as a body has existed. I think we've just seen the fraudulent election that happened in Uganda and in Tanzania, where they went on to congratulate the leaders for winning. So I think it's all about how it's all about the leaders that are in place to lead such kind of organizations, and also the framework that exists within those countries. I think I just touched on the case where we had in Kenya, where we've had elections being annulled, for example, in the 2017 elections here in Kenya. So it all boils down to the specific countries having a very strong judicial systems, which are not influenced by the executive.
Okay. Adikha, I think you should take on that same question and talk to us your thoughts about regional bodies and the role that they play. ECOWAS, AU, I think there's another, those regional bodies, in fact, all of them.
Yes. I think for the longest time, Felicity, all of us agree that the African Union has actually failed Africa in a big way. African Union has actually failed to represent the wills, the wishes, and the aspiration of the African people as a continent. Many a times when issues around power extension arise, or during fraudulent elections, we've seen the AU rush into congratulating the incumbency without taking time to, first of all, just learn the process through which a country would need to get over after an election. We've seen countries run into war, but then the African Union has only stuck its foot in supporting the regime that is in place. And that has actually not worked well for the continent in a larger perspective. We've seen smaller bodies like the East African Union, not taking a center stage into actually advising their own countries into following and upholding the rule of law and matters constitutionalism, but rather they've always danced to the tune of the regime in power. And this has led to many countries fostering not a united Africa, but a divided Africa. You find that countries in the Western West Africa, for example, they have ECOWAS. But then if you ask yourself, does ECOWAS represent the wills and the aspiration of the West African people? Still, it doesn't answer to that. Why? African countries are divided upon regimes. They are serving their own selfish interests. The African Union is a toothless dog, that cannot bite where issues, when it's called to respond, when it's called to stand up and protect the interests of the African people. So my call would just be maybe, moving forward, the African Union and all these bodies need to align themselves to the demands and the wishes of the people rather than to the wishes and demands of regimes. Thank you very much.
I think if I've spoken to 10 people, 8 of them really share the same sentiment when it comes to the AU and what it does. But it's still a strong body and one of the strong hopes of this continent if we can really work on the basics. I think I'll stay with you with this question and then I'll go to Abdirahman to add his thoughts to it. What safeguards, legal, political, or civil, can help ensure that constitutional reforms strengthen democracy rather than undermine it, as we wrap up?
One, I would suggest that the room for the civic, the people's ground be protected at first. That is the civil democratic space, whereby the people are allowed to freely express themselves the people are allowed freely to choose their own leaders. The
Okay.
people are allowed freely to stand up and just be able to give petitions and memorandums that clearly define what they would want done and what they would want to really see being done in their own countries. That in a way would just go into strengthening their parliaments, strengthening their judiciary, and in a way also just giving room for the civil society organizations in every nation just to flourish, to enable democracy to just also flourish.
Okay. Excuse me. Abdirahman, your thoughts on that quickly?
I think one of the main things that needs to happen is limiting the powers of the executive, guaranteeing the freedom of rights, ensuring we have a robust and a strong judicial system that's sovereign. And once we have a state has those in place, I think it can flourish and have proper and good constitutional amendments without any fuss.
And Adikha, thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your time and your thoughts with us on the subject.
Thank you very much.
All right, we're supposed to have Levi earlier, but network again acted up. We still thank him for choosing to speak with us, even though the network failed. And thank you for watching and being here with us in One Slot. As always, we would like your feedback. Please share them. Use the hashtag OneSlot or find us on any of our social media platform at New Central TV to share them with us. Until next time, I'm Felicity Ezewuike. Bye for now.